The first time my daughter looked straight through me at Thanksgiving, I told myself she was just tired from the drive. The second time, 4 years later, standing in a hospital hallway that smelled like bleach and bad coffee, I finally understood she'd been looking through me on purpose the whole time. I'm going to tell you what happened on the day the fire department gave me a send-off after 38 years of running into buildings other people were running out of, and what happened 4 hours later when my phone lit up on a gas station counter in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and didn't stop for the better part of a night. Before we get into it, if you're the kind of person who still calls your mother back on the first ring, drop where you're watching from tonight. And if you've got a niece or a nephew who showed up for you when your own kids didn't, hit subscribe, because I've got a feeling you're going to want to see how this one ends. I need to start with Hannah, because none of the rest of it makes any sense without her. Hannah is my niece, my late brother Walt's girl. Walt died of a stroke when Hannah was 23, collapsed in the parking lot of the elementary school where he taught 5th grade for 19 years, the same school Hannah herself had gone to as a kid, 3 blocks from where I'm sitting right now. She was the one who found him. She rode in the ambulance. She called me from a hallway at Mercy General with her voice shaking so hard I could barely make out the words. And 2 days after the funeral, she went back to substitute teaching his old classroom because the district couldn't find anyone else fast enough, and she couldn't stand the thought of strangers in his room. That's who Hannah is. She kept showing up to that classroom for 3 years on a sub's paycheck, coaching the same after-school chess club Walt used to run, buying supplies out of her own pocket when the school budget came up short, because she said somebody had to, and it might as well be somebody who loved him. She never once asked me for a dime. When her car transmission gave out 2 winters back, she rode the bus 40 minutes each way for 5 months rather than ask family for help. She was barely scraping by and too stubborn to let anyone see it. My name is Harold Kowalski. Everybody who's known me more than a week just calls me Hal. I'm 69 years old, and I spent 38 years as a firefighter and then a captain with the Council Bluffs Fire Department, Station 4. The busiest house in the city. I worked every Christmas morning for the first 11 years of my daughter's life because somebody has to be on shift, and I told myself that was just the job, that the job was noble enough to cover the gap it left at home. I missed her 8th grade graduation because of a warehouse fire on the industrial loop that took 14 hours to fully knock down. I missed her 16th birthday because a man 3 streets over had a heart attack, and I was the one who got there first and did compressions on his kitchen floor for 6 minutes until the medics took over, and I've never once regretted saving that man's life. But I regret, some nights, that nobody explained to my daughter why her father wasn't at the table blowing out candles with her. I told myself for years that the uniform was the price of protecting people, and I never once stopped to ask my little girl whether she wanted a protector or just wanted her dad home by 6. That's my fault in this story, and I'm not going to spend the next while pretending otherwise. I built a house out of service and sacrifice, and I never checked whether the people inside it felt safe or just alone. My wife, Donna, passed 9 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the funeral, fast enough that we barely had time to be angry about it before we had to start being grateful for whatever time was left. Donna used to say our daughter, Casey, had my temper and her own mother's gift for turning silence into a weapon, and that the two together were going to be a hard combination for anybody who loved her, including me. I used to laugh when Donna said it, the way you laugh at something true enough to sting a little. I don't laugh at it anymore. I think about it most nights now. On a Tuesday morning in April, I got a call from the city fire chief, a woman named Patricia Alvarez, who'd come up through the ranks 2 stations over from mine and had known me since she was a rookie. I'd trained on ladder work. She told me the department wanted to retire me properly. Not a cake in the break room and a handshake at shift change, but a real ceremony, out at the county fairgrounds pavilion, the kind they do once a decade, for the guys who've put in real time, and it was going to be covered by the local news, because 38 years without a single disciplinary mark was apparently rare enough to be a story. I called my daughter, before I called anybody else, before I even called Hannah. I remember exactly what I said. I told her they were putting me on the 6 o'clock news, 38 years, and that I wanted her there in the front row where I could see her face. There was a pause on the line that I didn't like the shape of, a pause I'd come to recognize over the years as the sound of somebody deciding how to let me down easy. She said, "Dad, We already put down the deposit on the cruise. It's Marcus's parents' anniversary trip. We can't back out now. I told her the ceremony date was fixed, that the fire department wasn't going to reschedule 38 years around somebody's timeshare. She said, and I want you to understand I've replayed this exact sentence in my head more times than I could count since. She said, Dad, it's just a retirement party. You'll have 300 firefighters there cheering for you. You won't even notice one empty chair. Her husband Marcus got on the phone after that, not to apologize for either of them, but to explain, calm as you please, that they'd already spent $4,000 on this trip, and surely I could understand that some things just can't be moved. I told him I understood completely. Then I hung up. That almost never happens between a father and the family he built, the father being the one to end the call first. But I did it, because I did not trust my own voice to hold steady if I kept that phone up to my ear 1 second longer. I sat in my kitchen on Willow Creek Road for a long time after that. The refrigerator hummed. A dog 2 yards over barked at something, and then went quiet. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. I just sat there running the numbers in my head. All those missed birthdays and school plays and Christmas mornings, all of it supposedly in service of giving my daughter a stable life. And here she was calling my retirement, the one thing in 38 years that was finally, purely about me, just a party she'd rather skip for a boat. That's when I thought about Hannah. I called her on a Wednesday evening. I could hear kids in the background, the chess club, somebody arguing over whether a move was legal. When I asked her to be my guest of honor at the ceremony, she went quiet for a second, and then she said, Uncle Hal, I would be honored. Not sure, not, I guess I could probably make it work. She said honored. This 26-year-old woman running herself ragged, keeping her dead father's classroom alive on a substitute salary, and she still had room in her heart for a word like that. If you've ever had somebody in your life who showed up for you without ever once being asked, somebody who just showed up because that's simply who they are, down to the bone, go ahead and hit that like button right now, because this story is about to need you in its corner. The evening of the ceremony, Hannah arrived in a navy dress she'd clearly bought for the occasion and clearly couldn't afford. The tags carefully cut off so close to the seam I could see where the scissors had slipped. She stood beside me at the front of the pavilion with her hands folded the way you fold your hands in a church pew, and every few minutes, she'd lean in and ask me quiet questions about the men and women in dress uniform she didn't recognize, genuinely curious, genuinely glowing with being there. The pavilion held maybe 250 people, folding chairs in long rows. A local news camera set up off to the side with its red light blinking steady. I gave a short speech about the crew I'd lost over the years, about a 4-alarm fire in 2003 that had taken the roof down 11 minutes after my last man cleared the building, about what it means to keep showing up for people on the worst night of their lives, even when nobody's ever going to thank you for it. I looked at the 2 empty folding chairs in the front row where my daughter and her husband should have been sitting. And then I looked at Hannah, and I kept right on talking. Then Chief Alvarez stepped up to the podium with a folder tucked under her arm, and something in the set of her shoulders told me this wasn't part of the program I'd been given. Hal has given this department 38 years, she said. So this year, for the first time in the history of this ceremony, we didn't just want to hand out a gold watch and a plaque. We asked Hal to name the one person who best represents what he's spent his life standing for. The person who'd be right there beside him if this whole department disappeared tomorrow. She called Hannah's name. I hadn't been told a word of what that meant. I found out with everybody else, live on the 6 o'clock news. Hannah has spent 3 years keeping her late father's 5th grade classroom alive on a substitute teacher's paycheck, Chief Alvarez said, buying supplies out of her own pocket so those kids never had to know the district was short on funding. Tonight, in honor of Hal's 38 years of service, the Council Bluffs Firefighters Benevolent Fund, along with 3 corporate sponsors who stepped forward this year, is awarding Hannah a full scholarship and a $210,000 grant to complete her teaching certification and establish a permanent memorial classroom fund in her father's name. The pavilion went dead silent, and then it didn't. Hannah's hands were shaking against the folds of her navy dress. She looked over at me like she needed permission to let herself believe it was real, and all I could do was nod because I couldn't trust my own throat to make words. The tears running down her face weren't the kind people perform for a camera. I've stood in enough burning houses and enough hospital hallways to know the difference. This was a young woman who'd ridden in an ambulance behind her dying father, finally being told that every sacrifice she'd made since had actually meant something to somebody besides herself. We didn't stay for the reception afterward. Hannah and I ended up an hour later at a Highway 6 truck stop diner called the Wagon Wheel, the kind of place with a laminated menu sticky at the corners and coffee that never stops coming. We ordered pie, because that's what you do on a night like that. She kept saying over and over, "I don't understand," not because the dollar figure confused her, but because she couldn't process the fact of being chosen. My phone sat face down on the Formica table between us. Around 9:30 it buzzed. I flipped it over without much thought and saw 7 missed calls, all from Casey. I didn't call back yet. I wasn't ready to hear whatever was coming. By 10 o'clock it was 19. Hannah noticed my face change and asked if everything was all right. I told her it would be. I wasn't lying to her. I just wasn't sure of it yet myself. By 10:30 the count had climbed to 31, and the texts had started stacking up underneath the calls. Fast. One right on top of the last. The kind of typing where you can feel somebody's blood pressure through the screen before you've even opened the message. I finally sat down and read them around 11. Casey's first text said, "Dad, what did you just do?" The next one, 2 minutes later, said, "That scholarship money was supposed to help Me go back to school. You knew I was thinking about my nursing degree." Then Marcus, a minute after that, we saw it on the hotel lobby TV. "You need to call the fire department and get this fixed right now." I sat there in a booth that smelled like fryer grease and burnt coffee, reading the words "get this fixed," like a decision I'd made in front of 250 people, and a television camera was some kind of clerical mix-up a phone call could undo. By the time Hannah and I left that diner, close to midnight, the count sat at 94. I hadn't answered a single one. I want to be honest with you about something. I thought I'd be furious if a night like this ever came. Some part of me had pictured it for years without ever admitting it to myself. Some version of me finally shouting into a phone everything I'd swallowed down for 2 decades. That is not what happened. What actually settled into me, staring at that number 94, was something quieter and a good deal colder, like a door easing shut without ever needing to slam. I called Casey back the next morning at 8 sharp, because I wasn't going to give her the chance to say later that her own father dodged her. She picked up before the first ring even finished. "Dad, you have to call the department. Tell them it was a mistake. That money was basically supposed to be mine eventually anyway, and you just handed it to Hannah on live television in front of the whole city." I told her, as calm as I could manage, that it wasn't a mistake, that I hadn't punished anybody, that I'd simply answered a question the department had put right in front of me. "Who represents what you've spent your life standing for?" And I'd answered it as honestly as I knew how. Nobody had made her book that cruise over my ceremony. Nobody had told Marcus to call 38 years just to party. They'd made a choice, and Hannah had made a different one, and the space between those two choices turned out to be the whole answer to Chief Alvarez's question. "So that's it," Casey said, her voice going flat and hard. "You're choosing her over your own daughter." I told her I wasn't choosing Hannah over her. I was choosing the person who showed up. She was the one who chose not to be one of the people standing in that room. She hung up on me. I let her. 6 weeks later, my attorney, a man named Robert Yoon, who'd handled Donna's estate and mine going on 15 years now, called to ask whether recent events had changed anything about how I wanted things arranged for after I'm gone. I told him I'd already been sitting with the question a while. Casey had never once, in her whole life, needed something from me that she didn't get. Donna and I had paid her tuition outright, covered every cent of her wedding, co-signed the loan on her and Marcus's first house without a second thought. Hannah had never asked me for one single thing in her entire life, and she'd lost her own father in a school parking lot at 23. I didn't rewrite the whole will out of spite, and I need you to understand that clearly, because spite was never what was driving any of this. I simply moved the cabin up on the Okoboji Lakes, the one Donna and I bought the summer Casey turned 6, the one Casey herself hadn't set foot in for 7 years, into a trust with Hannah named as caretaker, on the condition that it stays in the family for good, for holidays, for reunions, for whoever in this family wants to use it, not locked away from Casey, just no longer hers to inherit and quietly sell off, which I'd since learned from a family friend had been exactly her plan for it all along. Casey found out about the cabin from Robert's office, not from me, about 5 months after the ceremony. She called once. I let it ring through to voicemail, and later that night, when I finally listened to it, her voice wasn't sharp this time. It was small. She said she didn't understand how things had gotten to this particular point between us. I think, if I'm honest with you, the way I've tried to be honest through this whole story, that might have been the first completely true sentence she'd said to me in years. I didn't call her back that night either. I sat out on my porch on Willow Creek Road with a mug of coffee going cold on the railing beside me, the same way Hannah's mug always goes cold on her desk when she's grading papers. And I thought about how strange it is, how the people who ask you for the least in this life are so often the ones who end up handing you the most. Hannah's Memorial Classroom Fund launched that September, and she named it the Walt Petrocelli 5th Grade Legacy Program, her idea entirely, not mine, a stubborn tribute to a father who never got to see any of it come together. She hung a small brass plaque by the classroom door with my name etched beneath her father's, not because I ever asked her to, but because she told me the whole story didn't make sense without both of us written into it somewhere. I stop by most Fridays now, after school lets out, and she still forgets her coffee on the corner of that desk until it's gone stone cold. Some things about a person don't change, and I've come around to being grateful for that instead of wishing it were otherwise. Casey and I talk sometimes now, not often, and never easily. I don't know if we'll ever get back to whatever it was we had before all this. And at some point I stopped waiting around for the one conversation that fixes everything. Because I've come to believe that particular conversation doesn't actually exist for people like us. What I have instead is quieter than any reconciliation would have been. I know exactly who shows up for me these days. I don't have to sit around wondering anymore. And there's a strange, hard-won kind of peace that comes with that certainty. Even on the nights it still aches somewhere behind my ribs. If any part of this story landed with you tonight, I want to ask you to do one simple thing before you close this out. Think hard about who actually shows up for you in your life. Not who's supposed to, not who you keep wishing would if they only tried a little harder, but who genuinely does, every single time, without being asked twice. Then go tell that person what they mean to you. Don't wait around for a stage and a news camera to say it out loud, because I promise you, most of us never get that stage. And if you've got a Hannah of your own out there, or a Casey, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments below. Thank you for sitting with this story tonight. If it meant something to you, like it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll be right here waiting the next time you need somewhere to sit with a story like this one.